Hello and welcome, and thank you so much for joining us today for Hire for Talent, Supporting Employees' Mental Health in the Workplace session with Kailea Switzer. My name is Caitlin Woods, and I'm a project agent at the CUDC Restigouche, located in Campbellton, New Brunswick, the traditional ancestral unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq First Nation, on which we are learning, working, and playing. Hire for Talent, for those of you who have not heard of us before, is a national awareness campaign aimed at increasing employer confidence in hiring people with disabilities and providing resources to help them tap into this talent pool during their search for skilled employees. So in celebration of SME Week and Disability Employment Awareness Month, today's session will aim to help SME leaders, managers, and HR professionals become aware of how ADHD, high sensitivity, anxiety, and depression can commonly affect employees. It will also aim to help you develop tools to create positive outcomes, respond effectively and compassionately, create system and design working conditions that are inclusive and promote employee well-being. So with that being said, I am pleased to present today's speaker, Kailea Switzer, a counseling therapist and a personal development coach. She helps people reduce anxiety, foster self-compassion, gain clarity, and move in the direction of what matters to them. Kailea has a BA in Educational Psychology from Mount Allison University, a Bachelor of Education in Teaching from St. Thomas University, and a Master of Education in Counseling from Harvard University. So without further ado, I'll pass it over to you, Kailea.
Thank you. I'm so happy to be here. I am going to just share my screen. Okay, so yes, my name is Kailea, and I, as we just chatted about, I have a background in educational psychology, teaching, and counseling. I've worked a lot in youth leadership programming, and I also lived in Los Angeles for several years when I was teaching kindergarten. And after that, we moved back to PEI. And I am now in private practice as a therapist. And I also offer coaching for individuals and business around time management and organization. So in my work, I work a lot with people with ADHD and executive functioning challenges. That's a big focus of the type of work that I do. And I also work with people who have high sensitivity and, of course, depression and anxiety in my work as a therapist. So I hope this will be helpful for you today. And my goal is that it will give you some very tangible and implementable ideas. So we're going to chat about systems and how we can design working conditions that are inclusive so that we can support employee mental health. The idea being that the more that we support members of our team, the more that the entire team will thrive. Can we look at educating ourselves so we know how to respond effectively and compassionately? And sometimes that even means looking inwards in how we would allow these things in ourselves, because once we can do that, it becomes easier to offer that to others. So I've divided the presentation into 3 sections: ADHD, highly sensitive people, and depression and anxiety. And we're going to spend most of the time in the first 2 areas, just because those are areas that I think are extremely common in the workplace and sometimes go unseen. And the more that we can put conditions in place with that assumption that it's happening, whether we know about it or not, the more that we're going to be benefiting the entire kind of culture of our environment. And then with depression and anxiety, those are things just to know. We'll touch on how to, maybe some things we might recognize in the workplace and some things that we can do to support, knowing that when there is a diagnosis for depression and anxiety, hopefully the people are seeking supports outside of the workplace as well. So I just wanted to start with giving us some context around what the situation looks like. How are we feeling when we think about mental health in the workplace? What does that look like in 2022 in our world, pandemic life? It's just an interesting time. And I found some studies that were looking at how are people feeling about this today. So Lyra Health did a study, and they said that 66% of the leaders that they surveyed in that study cited that supporting employee mental health was one of the top challenges that they're facing in their jobs. And I just anecdotally, in the work that I do, I feel that anyone I speak to in a leadership role tells me that this is a really big challenge that they're not sure how to face. So I wonder if that resonates with people who are listening. One, the employee mental health crisis is worsening. So based on this Lyra Health study, they said employees' mental health is at an all-time low. Nearly a third of the workers surveyed said their mental health had declined over the past year. So it was up from 24% to 31% at the end of 2020. And most employers are prioritizing workforce mental health. So the vast majority, 92%, said that providing mental health support for their people became a higher priority for their company in 2021. And I'm sure that is continuing to grow now. More than half of leaders surveyed said they believe many or a lot of their employees are actively dealing with one or more mental health issues. So that's a big number. And obviously, we can't talk about that without considering the context of the pandemic and how that is impacting mental health. So this was a study by the Canadian Community Health Survey, where they were looking at self-rated mental health. And you can see self-rated mental health from 2020 to early 2022 has just decreased. So we're all being affected in just sort of a global way because of the impacts of the pandemic. Even as that landscape is changing, it has impacts. Mental health in the workplace. So we know that workplaces that promote good mental health and reduce work stress not only enhance mental and physical health, but are also likely to reduce absenteeism, to improve work performance and productivity, boost staff morale and motivation, and minimize tension and conflict between colleagues. And I feel like even saying that, it's like, I just think we're shifting. I think that that used to be the reason. Like it used to be like, well, I better prioritize good mental health for my employees, even though it's kind of a pain. Like that was sort of the vibe, in my view anyway, is that it's like, this is the thing we have to check off on a list because apparently it will reduce absenteeism and create more productivity. And it just seems like a thing we're supposed to do. I feel that we're deepening in our understanding of that, and just almost as a collective, moving towards seeing it a little bit in a more nuanced way, which is less, let's just do this for outcomes for the company, but more, let's do this because this is more humane. Like this is more how we ourselves want to be treated. This is the world we want to live in. This is the world we want to build. And I think that there's still differences in how comfortable people are making these shifts. And a lot of what I noticed in doing this, creating this presentation, was that it seriously parallels what I learned in becoming a teacher around inclusion. And in the same way that teachers had to really make mental shifts to think about what their role actually is and what is the point of schools and what are we aiming for school to be about, when inclusion entered the equation, where we were saying, okay, we're going to keep kids together and we're going to train teachers to be able to support all sorts of different learners and needs within their classroom. We're going to assume that there's going to be a wide variation in what that looks like. We're going to approach it with compassion and viewing that as not only benefiting the kids who need accommodations, but that having inclusion benefits all children in terms of the type of world and type of citizens we're trying to raise. And there was a lot of pushback and a lot of resistance to that for many, many people. And I've always had compassion for that, because in a way it was asking teachers who had started before that time, if they weren't already doing those things, it's like their role entirely changed and they had to have a completely different job than they had signed up for. And I feel like the leaders that I have worked with sometimes echo some of those same sentiments of like, but this isn't the job of me. Like, this isn't what I'm supposed to need to be doing. So I think that we're just at a moment in time where I just think that's important to sit with and think about, and that change is hard, and that we have to think about it around what is the ultimate world that we want to live in, that we would want our kids to live in, that we ourselves would want, that we just sort of, if we think about it in those terms, maybe it can make a little more sense. So I don't want to just say, let's do this for financial gain. I don't want to say, let's put these systems in place so that your bottom line improves and that you get, and does it? Yes, but that really isn't the primary driver, I don't think. So we know burnout is resulting in many people leaving the workforce. I found this quote from that same Your Health thing. It said, the pandemic has forced people to reflect on what really matters most to them. And if their employer does not support their ability to prioritize values outside of work, people may look elsewhere, or they may risk becoming burned out and frustrated. And again, I have just in real life seen this happening. And I think that it's stressful and it's hard also can, like, my heart breaks for the people who are in work leadership roles, because you're in a really tough spot too, because it's like these sudden shifts and these sort of boundaries or demands that are very difficult to meet in an immediate sense, and that we're just at that crossroads. I think 70% of Canadian employees are concerned about the psychological health of their workplace. Wow, that's a big number. 14% of Canadian employees don't think their workplace is healthy or safe at all. And 30% of short and long-term disability claims in Canada are attributed to mental health problems and illnesses. So the total cost from mental health problems to the Canadian economy exceeds 50 billion annually, and likely more in recent years. Because this, from 2011, it said mental health problems and illnesses among working adults in Canada cost employers more than 6 billion in lost productivity, just from absenteeism and turnover. But we can imagine how that, I'd be interested in what the next version of that study will say. Mental Health Commission of Canada. So in the research I did, I came across a lot of resources through that website, and I hadn't heard of it before. So I just wanted to share it in case you're looking for resources. They have something for free that's called the Standard. It's the National Standard of Canada for Psychological Health and Safety in the Workplace. And it's a set of voluntary guidelines, tools, and resources. So there's a lot of resources on their website, and a lot of kind of guidelines, documents, handouts, trainings, different things. I just wanted to mention that as an example of something you can get a downloadable or printable version of, which is, just looking at how to reduce psychological harm in the workplace. Also, just on a global scale, this is not we're not really viewing this as a passing fad right now. It's becoming a world level priority. So in 2022, the World Health Organization will publish the first ever global guidelines on mental health and work. It will include consideration of how to ensure safe, supportive, and decent working conditions that promote and protect mental health. There'll be 3 types of strategies. One is about what interventions can we put into the organization in terms of working conditions, like flexible working arrangements. How do we actually promote a healthy work-life balance? And how do we reduce stigma of mental health in the workplace? The second part will be mental health training for on the manager level to strengthen people's skill sets to be able, and their attitudes, so that they may be able to support their team's mental health needs. And the third part will be interventions for the workers themselves to increase their individual coping capacities. So stress management training and strategies to promote more leisure-based physical activity. So I just thought that was so interesting. I also hadn't known that this is like an initiative on a World Health Organization level scale to try to move our kind of collective worldview in this direction. In other words, I don't know how late of an adopter we want to be to this. Some actionable ideas. So there are so many resources out there to support on system and policy level, like that website I was telling you about. There's so much we can do in that area, but I work on the one-on-one. So I want to give you tangible takeaways and some real life implementation that you can leave here and apply for yourself and for actual people you work with. I just want to say, because I feel like this is stressful talk sometimes, and it can make us feel like, oh, there's just so much more to do. That's how teachers feel. Teachers have, especially, I remember that feeling of being like, how much more can I be expected to do with the same amount of resources? And when the target keeps changing, can be very discouraging when you're trying really hard to do a good job. So I just want to name that you are on the right track just by listening to this presentation. And the goal is not perfection. It is honestly just about effort. 1% improvements over time really does add up. There are some mental health challenges that are more medicalized, meaning like anxiety and depression. We almost treat them because they're medicalized, because there's a diagnosis in that way. There's a different sort of seriousness, I guess, that we think of them, but I want to talk about promoting mental wellness for all employees and increasing our awareness of neurodivergence more broadly. So neurodivergence is just that I feel and see that everyone's brain just works differently. We all have these unique brains. We have lots in common and we have differences. And that's a wonderful thing about the world. And in a classroom, we think a lot about neurodivergence and how that strengthens the whole when we can view the strengths in each thing as well. Like each type of brain, we can view its strengths and we can also view where there's going to be some challenges. If we can adopt that kind of mindset, I think that can help with where we're at in workplaces right now. And it's really similar to how the strongest teachers operate their classrooms. It's the more that we study what makes classrooms successful, what makes teachers successful, what makes kids successful and happy, it is going to be a teacher that already does a lot of this stuff. And I'm thinking that that's the way we're moving for directors, leaders, managers, is putting these things in place and approaching it in the same way a teacher would. We can trust that understanding and supporting neurodivergence will always strengthen the workforce. It'll strengthen each individual member. It'll strengthen the community and it'll strengthen the outcomes. All right. So part one, after my intro, ADHD. So we probably know that ADHD represents attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. And when their H isn't in it, when we say ADD, that's just without the hyperactivity. So it is one of the most common neurodevelopmental disorders, which just means it's a developmental impairment of the brain's self-management system. So as someone's growing, it is the part of the brain that does executive functioning, time management, planning, organization, being able to regulate things. That is where this happens. When we see the hyperactivity, it's sort of the kind of classic understanding of ADHD. It's that hyperactive, moving, like driven by a motor thing, but we don't always see that. And that can be important to know. There's another kind of presentation called the primarily inattentive. And this is the one that gets missed a lot historically, especially if you're in if you're have been out of school for a while, like the generation before now, this one was missed a lot. So it's more that we have difficulty focusing, difficulty finishing tasks and following instructions, maybe described as distracted or forgetful. Not going to be a big, they're not going to have a lot of behavior challenges necessarily in the classroom. It's more that they just, things fall through the cracks. And then there's a combined type where you see both. Often people will say, well, I don't think I have this, or I don't think my child has this, because it's not that they can't focus. We should see them play video games. You should see them do Lego. You should see them do what they're like when they're at hockey. You should see if they're doing something they love, they will be able to focus. They'll actually be able to hyper focus, which is sort of like a special power. It's a magical thing to be able to hyper focus like that. So it's not that you can't concentrate. It's just that there's a lack of the ability to select what to concentrate on sometimes. So it can be like right now, I'm concentrating on this presentation. But if I stop for a second, it's like the clock is ticking, the sound machine's going, there's some sound outside the building. I'm choosing to block that out and focus. With this presentation, sometimes that ability is not as developed. So it's not that you can't pay attention, it's that you could pay attention to everything equally. So I could be paying attention to the clock just as much as I'm trying to do the presentation, just as much as I'm listening to the sound machine, just as much as I'm thinking about how my clothes feel on my body. It's sort of a sharing of the attention without a selective thing. And that's a helpful distinction, I think. Many, many, many adults with ADHD experience poor self-worth, a high sensitivity towards criticism, and engage in a lot of increased self-criticism. There's something called rejection sensitive dysphoria, which is interesting to look up if you're curious. That is highly correlated with ADHD, especially in adults who grew up in the school system of, the past. They've been made to feel at fault for most of their life, as if they were lazy, just not trying hard enough. And as a result, have internalized a lot of shame, and have developed shielding techniques or masking techniques. So they may have compensated and overcompensated so intensely that they wouldn't be able, like, aren't aware that they actually would have this type of condition. So hypervigilance is something you might see in someone who would be in the workplace today, which is like almost an excessive double checking of emails and stuff before they send it out, of like that it would be so terrible to have like a typo, that kind of thing can hold them up. Maybe an increased anxiety, or like a constant checking to make sure, just like a making sure of things all the time. That's what you might have seen if somebody had learned how to mask this sort of this thing that they didn't understand while they were growing up. Historically, it's been a lot harder to identify in girls who are more prone to have the inattentive type, as they weren't disruptive to the learning environment. So many people I work with would be women in their 30s and 40s who have just now gotten a diagnosis. We do estimate that it's 5 to 9% of the population who has ADHD. And just in my work, I just always want to say that, like, all of my favorite people have ADHD. That is like a fascinating thing. And I wonder if in the future we will view it differently, like that we won't. I almost wonder if we can let go of the need to see it as a disorder. Not that there's not challenges with it, not that there's not actual limitations and like things that are very challenging, for sure. But I would argue that there are like every type of brain has strengths and challenges. Like if you're someone who can do really well in the traditional school system and sit and listen and do your homework, and you will be praised. But I also think about how you may lack flexible thinking. You may lack spontaneity, or being able to be more improvisational. You may be somebody who is very connected to extrinsic motivation as opposed to intrinsic. Like there's always going to be strengths and challenges for all humans, but because we view ADHD as this disorder, and because the school system isn't super well designed to support this, although it's improving all the time, I think that the shame and the idea of like, you're just not trying hard enough, you're not, you're lazy, it's that erodes the self-worth and then intensifies the symptoms. That's a really important thing, I think, in the kind of self-healing, if this is something you discover in yourself later in life, and just to have more of an awareness for the other people that we work with. So just to visually represent this, there's the inattention, hyperactivity, and impulsivity are symptoms of ADHD, and you don't always see them all. I've been talking about the strengths of adults with ADHD because, of course, there are so many and very significant strengths. And when channeled in ways that work to their strengths, wow, you can see some amazing things. Often see things no one else would. They can think very deeply and broadly. I often think of the brains that I get to be around. It's like they see things instead of like this much depth. It's like they see things up there and down there and over there and up there and like in this whole big circle. And it's like almost getting it out and communicated is hard, but it's in there. And if you can find a way, it's fascinating. They have a stick-to-itness that's remarkable. Often when somebody has been challenged for most of their life, like had things be more difficult for them, but didn't know why, they can develop a grit or a tolerance for resistance that allows them to stay in challenges, which is a really rare and special thing. They can be more spontaneous, flexible, innovative, adaptable, and they can be skilled at improvising, thinking on their feet, and emotional depth. And, depending how much self-acceptance is there, you'll see more and more of these kind of strengths coming through. And obviously each person has their own individual things that they bring. Those are some patterns that I've kind of generally seen. So how can employers support ADHD? 1, explicit clarity, clear short-term deadlines. That would be a huge, maybe top tip. And I don't know who this doesn't benefit. So it's this, when I say like approach it like a teacher would a classroom, it's like you put certain things in place that absolutely like benefit everybody and then extra benefit some people. Like, so there's no harm, there's no bad outcome from doing this, but it creates really positive outcomes for people who without this can struggle a lot more. So what I mean is being like super duper clear and much more clear than we often think we need to be, and creating more short-term deadlines can help people, because task initiation is often a challenge, which is like getting started on something, especially if it's like this big thing in the future that we need to get started on. That can be a really hard thing to approach. So if we don't understand this, we could perceive that as laziness or an intentional procrastination, and the person themselves, if they've internalized a lot of this, they may be saying that to themselves. Why am I so lazy? Why can't I get it together? Oh, I lack so much motivation and willpower. But typically there is more to it, and treating it as if there is more to it will create the movement that everyone wants anyway. In order for there to be motivation, people need a sense of progress. We need to feel like we're moving towards something. So whenever we can provide clear support with the starting steps and breaking things down into smaller pieces, people are going to feel more successful. That's going to create more motivation, and allows people to stay in it and approach it more easily. There also can be something called time blindness with ADHD, which is just like, it's like the mental math. First of all humans aren't great at time. Like time is really tricky for our brains. And unless we've done a lot of training to ourselves to compensate for the fact that we're not built to think in terms of time, it's going to be an area that, just trips people up. So we're wanting to think in terms of work back schedules, because that helps create a sense of urgency. If something is 6 weeks away, with time blindness, it feels like forever. It's not relevant to right now, but a work back schedule that says, well, this is what we should be doing 6 weeks from now. This is what our target would be 5 weeks from now, 4 weeks from now, 3 weeks from now. All of a sudden, the 1 week from now target feels more meaningful because it's part of a larger system. But doing that work in one's own head is not a skill that everybody has. Granted, some people are really good at it, and they, whoever that is on your team, help empower them to use that skill to help others. Because as I say, everybody offers different skills, and the fact that not everyone is good at that doesn't mean they can't get better, but it also means that identifying it can allow their strengths to come through by putting in something to support, prevent this from being a block. So short-term deadlines, explicit clarity, work back schedules. Number 2, proactive support and regular check-ins. So this one's going to come up throughout the presentation. It's just the relationships. Relationships are so key. That would be what you would hear any expert teacher say. That was what I would say in terms of therapeutic work or coaching. It's if there's no relationship, you're not going to have anything. That is especially true with ADHD. So being able to help people by checking in regularly and staying connected is going to have all these positive benefits that we might not even be able to quantify, but it just reduces the friction to moving. Bullet point tasks and timelines, is always a recommendation. Not too many words. Setting up calendar invites to check in, having them confirm they understand the first target and deadline. So that could be like, all right, we just had this big meeting. We talked about this large company initiative. This is what it means for you. Just to recap, like you're responsible for these things. And the first one is by the end of next week. Does that seem possible? You're going to do X by next Friday. Cool. And like that kind of clarity. being able to explicitly map out the tiny first steps, setting those short-term targets and checking in goes a long way. And never underestimate the power of encouragement and positive feedback. It costs nothing. And being able to be like, yeah, that's a great plan. Okay, how are you wanting to, what are your targets? If you're helping them learn to set their own targets and you're just overseeing it, just always giving encouragement. It's similar to a classroom. Again, it's like you catch people being good. Like anytime a kid is doing something that you want to see, you're like, look at you. Like, it's just, humans like it, and it does not cost a thing. It's just a habit we sometimes have to train ourselves on. But any super strong manager is probably already doing this. Does it have to be sugary sweet? No. Does it have to be fake? Absolutely shouldn't be. It needs to be genuine. It needs to be in your own tone, and it needs to be in your, like, a truthful thing. But we can train ourselves to wear glasses for the world that look for growth in the right direction, and then find a way to communicate that, because that's how you get the best out of people. And that's how people feel the best about themselves. When we think about a work back plan, I always love a visual home base. And with ADHD, this is going to go a long way. So you may already do this, like sort of status update organization docs with your teams, but it is really valuable, whether if you're someone's direct report and you're helping them manage competing priorities, to create something like this, like a macro home base, where we're saying, all right, you've got these you see these categories on the left, where you could just model this and people can take this and run with it on their own. But it's like, you're responsible for these 2 reports, these 2 events, some HR stuff, and some miscellaneous stuff. And then life, because it's good to think about that. We're looking at a timeline across a month, and we're saying, so if these are all your big picture things that need to happen, can we set a target week by week for each one? Because then all of a sudden we can see how everything's going to get done, but our brain is able to zone in 1 week at a time and say, these are my weekly priorities, without kind of losing the forest for the trees, or whatever that expression is. Like, it allows us to keep multiple things on the go without, it's like we don't get too hyper focused, because that's the risk. Okay. The third one is know about that perfectionism and self-criticism is always in the equation. So like positive reinforcement, as I said, goes a long way. Normalize draft versions, like modeling your own mistakes and failures. This is really hard with ADHD. It's that the draft version thing, showing somebody what they're working on without it being done, or without it being perfect, or without it being the vision that they aspire to, is like unbelievably overexposed. So some people have gotten really good at this. If they've learned to be more free and saying like, all right, this is just my like vomit draft is what people will say. Like, this is just my first try. Let's get some feedback. But to do that requires a lot of safety and self-worth. And sometimes people are very fragile in that area. So the more that we can be like, okay, this is obviously not as good as it's going to eventually be, but let's just get some words on a page, and we trust ourselves to hone it later. Modeling your own process of like, what did it look like before it looked really good, can help people feel more safe to do that. And that safety in those check-ins will allow people to show you more of their process along the way, because so often it's really difficult for people to do that. And they would rather only show the finished product, never show the in-between. Fourth is the physical supports. So a wall that can be written on, or a large scale whiteboard, can be a really useful tool for people to just have access to in their office. A lot of people benefit from that visual, like seeing it on the wall. Like, I always think about university students and how they should all have a semester, like a 4-month wall calendar, like white dry erase situation, where they can see all of their deadlines for the whole semester at a glance, and then just cross them off or erase them as they go. Because without a visual sort of synthesis, our brains are just not capable of holding all the competing priorities. So just changing the format, making it visual, can go a long way in getting people kind of all in the same headspace. Letting people move around in meetings, if that hyperactivity is a thing, or stand up or use fidget toys, that kind of thing. having someone summarize meeting and action items at the end. So again, is there someone with this strength in your team who you can say at the end of these big team meetings, is there someone who not only took notes, but created a short list of the key actions that came from that meeting with a point person or any other things that were decided? That closing the loop makes people a lot less like frustrated and things don't fall through the cracks and prevents miscommunication. So it's like, we have this big hour-long meeting, and in it, we decided on X, Y, and Z. And within those, we also said that like 3 things need to happen for each of those decisions, but who is going to do them? It's pulling that together in a very like, just to recap, Angela is on task A, right? Like that kind of thing, closing that loop makes everything more efficient. And encouraging and modeling breaks, which means physical movement at lunch, going for a walk, getting fresh air, like modeling that, making that a norm is always going to allow people to take care of themselves without worrying about criticism or like that people are going to say they're lazy, because that's a really deep fear often with ADHD. So being able to permit themselves to do that will take care of their body and their mind in a way that creates like a more fulfilling day in every sense of the word. 5, I told you I had a lot for ADHD. This is the area of passion for me. Task buddies, so encouraging people to work alongside someone else to do something they've been avoiding. Body doubling, again, think of your own self. Like, have you ever tried that? That's just a useful technique. If there's something we really don't want to be doing, is there a friend or someone you can work with and say, we're both going to work on some things for 2 hours together. We're not going to talk. We're just going to work side by side. That is unbelievably effective. Offering PD training on time management, organization systems. So supporting your employees if someone says they have ADHD or they come to identify that and they want to get an ADHD coach or a therapist who specializes in these skills. Like there's me, but there's a lot of people who do this type of thing. Can you offer it as their PD funding that they can access, or their wellness spending, or their counseling benefits, like any combination to help cover the cost, because it will be so like the impact of it on their performance and how they feel at work can be really worthwhile. Setting a time versus an outcome goal. So I just, again, great life strategy for everybody. When there's something that we're avoiding, often it's because our brain finds the time, an unpredictable time commitment. So it's like, I'm not going to clean the bathroom because I'm not exactly sure how long that's going to take. What if I end up getting too into it and I do it for like, and then one thing leads to another and I've spent the whole day. Like our brain sort of avoids things that start to feel like a black hole. Whereas if it's like, I'm going to do, like a task that's really defined, and we know how long it's going to take, we are less likely to avoid it. So I personally love setting a time versus an outcome goal for things that it's just like, I don't know how long it'll take. So instead of saying I'm going to finish X, I would say I'm going to work on X for 45 minutes and just see how far I get. That way it's in my control and it has a container. Also, like, let's see how far we can get in 10 minutes, or how many ideas can we jot down in 5 minutes? Anything like the gamify is effective on a psychological level for most of us. So as I say, if something's time bound, we're less likely to avoid it. 8, leaving room for creativity. So I hope this doesn't come across as trying to micromanage with people, because clarity is different than micromanaging. It's just putting the right structures in place to allow for that liberation. Because if we have some structure in terms of like the targets and the timeline, then there can be safety for the freedom in allowing how to get there. And that is where you'll see people with ADHD can really shine, because they can think of approaches that nobody else would have. And they can think of solutions that nobody else would have. And energy matching, again, human thing, but especially relevant with ADHD. Certain activities just make more sense in the morning versus the afternoon. And do we have the self-awareness and the flexibility to account for that? Like for me, I can work with clients all afternoon long because I'll feed off their energy, but I could not write or create something, like do something that's more brain intensive in the afternoon. Like for me, it's always going to be a smoother sailing situation in the morning, as opposed to trying to like force the energy later. So matching the task to your energy level is just a good self-awareness thing, but on a workplace level, modeling this, talking about this, helping people think in that way, and also just allowing the flexibility where it's like maybe emails make more sense a little bit later in the day, and it makes sense to have a work block for an hour in the morning to like bang out the most meaningful task to move the needle on that before you get derailed by emails and the rest of the day. Letting yourself be interested in people's, what they view as their interests and strengths, and trying to work with that. Because if you can really channel that hyper focus ability, that deep energy, that deep passion, that deep like desire to do things well, you can see such remarkable things. Now we're shifting to highly sensitive people. Okay, so I find this one really, really interesting. I discovered it as a concept, or as there's books on it and stuff. Like I discovered this whole world maybe 6-7 years ago. And I was at the time like, what? Like, because my whole life I've been told I'm too sensitive and all of these things. And I think that a lot of people who have been told they're very sensitive and have maybe a bit of shame around it, because it's like been told to me as a thing of other people are thicker skinned. What's wrong with you? Like, come on. And I think that when you're especially highly sensitive, then hearing that is hard. So it's a real thing that we see in nature. And I found this very healing for me. And I think that if you don't resonate with this, it can be one of those things that you can just observe in yourself. If you have a lot of resistance to this, or if you have any sort of judgment around it, sometimes that's a sign that you yourself shut down your own sensitivity a long time ago. So in science, we refer to it as sensory processing sensitivity. It's a neutral natural trait, which affects approximately 15 to 20% of the human population. It's found in over 100 animal species. People are born with this. So it's like I think of it as how we process sensory information. It's just some people it's like we process it more intensely. It's like our nerve endings are more exposed. We literally feel more of the stimulation in the world. We feel physically things more. So it's DOES is the acronym, possessing an unusual depth of processing, being easily overstimulated, being more emotionally reactive, and being sensitive to subtle stimuli. Often people are described as empathetic, who are HSPs, I'll call them. They may be detail-oriented, emotional, and quiet. Sensory processing sensitivity is not a disorder. HSPs are generally quick to notice subtle changes. They're very conscientious, thoughtful of others' needs, and intuitive to the feelings of those around them, and often are averse to violent entertainment. Though roughly 30% of HSPs are extroverts, most are introverts, and they often need to take time for themselves to recuperate during busy and overwhelming situations. So you might be thinking to yourself, is this me? Is this my partner? Is this someone I work with? It's just helpful to think of it as, real. The business world is undoubtedly undervaluing its HSPs. People who are gifted and intuitive, yet conscientious and determined not to make mistakes, ought to be treasured employees. But we're less likely to fit into the business world when the metaphors for achievement are warfare, pioneering, and expansion. That's Dr. Elaine Aron is the primary researcher, I would say, on HSPs, and has some beautiful books on it. I'll share some names of books at the end. Strengths of HSPs would be that they notice subtle stimuli, both kind of environmental, but also emotional subtle stimuli, very empathetic, which we know is an in-demand leadership quality, more emotionally perceptive of nuanced, subtle shifts, very deep thinkers. They're dedicated team players. They have high attention to detail. They often take care to make sure others are comfortable. They're often expressing their high sensitivity in their creative problem solving, their strong rapport building, their conscientiousness and insight. So just think about who might be an HSP on your team. Given the constant perceptiveness and responsiveness of the HSP nervous system, HSPs can burn out more quickly. They're sensitive to noise, to light, visual chaos, emotional energy, and it's just like most offices are exhausting for HSPs, especially open concept. So just that's why sometimes they don't end up in offices, because if the office isn't designed to not totally exhaust their nervous system, then they're not going to stay very long. So in addition to physiological and psychological safety, HSPs need neurological safety. One thing we can do is physical comfort. We know like this is also great for everyone. Having good ergonomics with our desk and chair, nice, like wonderful thing. But if you're in HSP, like, and the way you interpret the physical environment and your physical stimuli is it's almost like the volume on that is turned up compared to people who wouldn't be HSPs. So being uncomfortable and like with the lighting, with the sounds, with the way they feel in their physical environment has it like withdraws from their bank account so much more than somebody who isn't highly sensitive. So it's like physically painful in a way that they may not want to speak about because they may have their whole life been told, suck it up, or like, come on, it's not that bad. It's not the best, but it's fine. So it's like an erasing of the experience, an invalidating of it. So just like allowing that to be real and trying to make sure people feel physically comfortable is a good thing. Allowing a serene workspace that in the larger environment that even if it is a more open concept or loud workplace, is there a more serene place to go to at some point? A more, maybe there's nature in there, maybe it's quieter, maybe the lighting's different. Go a little rest space. Be mindful of the noise, smells, lights, and private workspaces if possible really help. And if not, or even if, like either way, the ability to listen to calming music or white noise on headphones is going to be great. Now, not all workplaces is that possible. Like I'm thinking of hospitals and stuff. Like there's lots of workplaces where we can't just do that. But if you can, wonderful. And if you can't, thinking about where are the recharge moments and spaces in the day. Having an access to quiet and privacy is going to be important. Offering flexibility, being able to work from home partially or fully, or just some time flexibility, like if you can start your day slightly differently in order to avoid rush hour, can really make a big difference. Like I think about that. If this is how much we have in our capacity tank at the start of the day, and if rush hour alone drains us to here, and we could have just avoided that altogether, wouldn't you want to if it doesn't make a huge difference? Stuff like that. The freedom to exercise or move at lunch, like offering office yoga or just allowing employees and being like explicit about that you're allowed to go. And if that means you want to work later to accommodate the time it took to go work out in the middle of the day, awesome. Like being able to trust people on that can break if the environment isn't possible or to be conducive to this, then that can be the recharge zone. I used to go to yoga at lunchtime when I worked in Toronto because I worked in an open concept office that was like extremely opposite to like I work in this quiet office alone now. It's like dim lighting. This is where I'm comfy, cozy couch and one other person and for when I do sessions. But I used to work in like a high intensity sales office, open phones all the time, bells ringing. And that was the only thing that kept me going, was being able to leave at lunch, walk to yoga, then eat my lunch at my desk, stay a half hour later to compensate for it. And I think that can go a really long way, but I had to advocate hard, and I felt very uncomfortable asking. And I felt like it was like they allowed it, but didn't love it. And it would have been awesome if it had been like, this is a totally viable option to choose. You can create a culture that values rest and recovery, even by modeling mini moments to like where you're exhaling throughout the day. If you're the leader, that you're just taking a couple of minutes to go for a walk and get some fresh air, and letting people know that that's happening goes a long way. Providing a soft landing. So focusing on the relationship and your interpersonal connection, just like I said with ADHD, so important, just like in any classroom in the entire world, just like in any strong management relationship, it's like the strength of the relationship allows the space to tolerate feedback. So the more that someone's an HSP, the more they want to do a good job. And then it's going to be hard to receive hard feedback. And I often think about I had these two bosses when I had my first real job in Toronto. They were both directors, and one of them was the ultimate definition of a soft landing, and the other one came from the corporate world. She used to be a lawyer. She was now in this nonprofit space, and she just like culturally had a different work vibe. And I could have listened to the soft landing boss, who I knew actually liked me and really worked on our relationship. She was able to give me some of the most meaningful feedback I've ever received. And it wasn't easy to hear. It wasn't sugar coated, but because the relationship was there, I trusted her, and I trusted that she also knew my intentions and liked me. And therefore I was like, please help me grow. The other one, instead of like boss one, her view was like, I believe in you, prove me right. And then boss two, it was like, I don't get, like, I'm not impressed, prove me wrong. And that shut me down so fast. And like boss one eventually coached boss two on how to work with me and everything got fine. But it was like, because I couldn't, I was just so scared. And you may be like, well, toughen up. And I'd be like, okay. But also that was the reality. And like, they got better outcomes from me whenever they worked from the relationship place. So seek out their deeper thoughts and practice patience. There is an innate sensitivity to subtleties, and they can easily spot hidden downsides and benefits about how people are going to feel about like new initiatives, whether that's other people in the company or outside. So they have the ability to pick up on this stuff. So if you can create the safety to hear their perspectives and seek it out, and have patience, because they're sometimes secondary processors, which just means they're not always going to be the fastest to respond. So if you have a big thing you're looking for feedback on from the team, give time like to prepare their thoughts and notes in advance. Or if you bring it up in a meeting, give time to think about it and write before they have to respond, or give the space to provide follow-up thoughts after the fact. Because if you allow for that time, you're going to get really rich material. So being more patient and allowing time for the depth of processing and thoughtful responses, and then understand their why. So I'm sure you're seeing a lot of parallels with the ADHD content. And that's because so many people with ADHD would also be an HSP. There's so much overlap, and also great life strategies, what I'm sharing, no matter what, no matter if you don't identify with any of this stuff, it will harm no one. So just think of it that way. But it will help a lot of people. Understanding their why. Oh my goodness. So if you can understand the specific skills of a HSP and make use of them purposefully, like, they're going to do so much for you. By asking them, what do you enjoy most about your job? What ways are you proud of the work you do? How would you like to make a bigger impact going forward? And why is this important to you? If you get in that zone, like these are people who lead with their hearts. So if that's not engaged, they're going to, it's like, feels like it's killing of the soul. It's like it's like, what is the actual point? Happens a lot. They don't like to do things just to do them most of the time. Okay. Whew. Here we go into depression and anxiety. Okay. Depression. We are probably familiar with this one. So these are some symptoms that we'll often see: loss of interest, decreased energy, feelings of low self-esteem or control, disturbed sleep, poor concentration. There are so many subtypes and distinctions with the diagnosis of depression. I'm not going to get into that right now. Just from the standpoint of the workplace, what you might see is that somebody who is experiencing depression might start retreating. So if you start to sense that, trying to seek them out for communication and touch points will prevent them from feeling more isolated. Providing some structure, again, is like, people need structure to feel safe and held. I want to be careful, because it's like, a lot of what I do is work with people who have completely unstructured time. Artists, self-employed people, university students, big groups of people. And then COVID, like in the pandemic, a lot of people all of a sudden had way less structure. We drown with zero structure. The right structures feel liberating, but it is very challenging to get that right. That takes so much self-awareness and trial and error. The right structures will always allow us to feel more free and held and contained, but not restricted. So when I say some structure, I mean, even if you're allowing flexible hours and working from home and all of the things, some structure around check-ins or some core hours where everyone's going to be online together, or some core days where we are going to connect in the office, those things are not necessarily restrictive. Like that can be enough to provide the floor, the foundation. Stronger relationships with coworkers and managers lower depression, period. So again, relationships. It's going to prevent depression. It's going to reduce it. It's very, very key. Relationships, I cannot stress enough how important they are in our life. And we're at work a lot of the time, so it's important. Depression will affect often our cognitive function. So again, clear targets broken into smaller steps, going to help. Also being successful, hitting those targets, getting that sense of motivation and progress also helps with the depression. So it's both going to help kind of respond compassionately to depression while it's happening, and also help someone start to get out of it. It never hurts to do that. And with deadlines, focusing on shorter term targets, just like we said with the ADHD, aiming for frequent experiences of success, little wins, and as much positive feedback as possible. Yes, I see. There's a theme to what I'm saying. It's like no one doesn't like having little experiences of success celebrated. It feels good. I really hope that by making the comparisons to the classroom, it's not like, I hope it doesn't seem patronizing or something, because people may be like, well, workplaces aren't classrooms. But if we can think in that sense, if we think of it's just we're grown-up people who used to be in classrooms and now we're in workplaces, and humans generally need the same things, no matter how old we are, I think everyone will just feel better. So it's like, instead of just celebrating when the huge event is pulled off, can we celebrate the tiny milestones along the way? Or if on a micro level, like with an individual, can we celebrate their progress over time? So it's like with a kid, it might not be, oh, now you're a fluent reader, but it's like, wow, you really figured out those sounds. Like those sounds that used to be tricky, I can tell you really know the difference now. It's like pointing out where things are going right. And in the workplace, that could be like, I'm really noticing that your work on this is elevated. Like I'm really seeing some growth, like good for you. And how did you do that? And like just taking the time to say that stuff reinforces motivation. People with depression can be highly self-critical. So being able to focus on their moments of achievement, like if they meet a deadline, like all of these things are, we shouldn't underestimate their value. And it's like, we're treating people as humans. And I think that it's like sometimes the resistance is like, I don't want to coddle people. They shouldn't need that. And I would say, let's do some inner child work with you if that's how you feel, because why is that? In what world is it that much work? Or it feels, and it can feel vulnerable to do this. So being able to sort of self-reflect on that. When sharing a task, focus on why it's important, like the positive impacts of it, as opposed to the costs and risks of them not finishing it. This will strengthen their intrinsic motivation. So always this, again, depression, no depression, great way to approach things. And know that the tendency sometimes, if we have someone that we're working with who has depression, is to just start to delegate this menial task, like the small, insignificant tasks, but that can actually increase their worthlessness. So being able to still give meaningful challenges within their areas of strength can help start to climb out of the depression by engaging the part of them that is worthy and valuable and matters to the team. Depression is an illness. It's typically time limited. It affects 1 in 5 people. So it's important to share resources within the company regularly. Anxiety symptoms, avoiding our friends and family, worrying, crying, feeling irritable, etc. We know about anxiety, I think. Some common workplace contributors to anxiety would be extra long work hours, high stress, a lack of support from managers and coworkers, having to give presentations, meeting deadlines, workplace conflict. 19% of people are estimated to currently be experiencing anxiety, and 30% at some point throughout their lifetime. So how can we support? We can look for changes in mood, behavior, performance. So if you notice someone on your team is deviating from their typical behavior and performance, it might be a sign of something going on with their mental health. It can be, sometimes we're just having a grumpy day. So it's not like, or something's happening at home or just whatever. This is more if we're seeing their performance consistently decline. So just paying attention to patterns of change. And it could be as subtle as someone just starting to leave their camera off more, or a decline in personal grooming. You just might sense that something's off. So you could just say something like, "You've been doing a great job. I noticed you haven't been as involved as usual in our meetings lately. Is everything okay?" And just open the door. For some resources on this, like how to train, if you're like, I'm scared what they would say, and then what would I do? Then I would recommend that might mean like some training on what to do and how to kind of be a safe container for those kinds of conversations might be useful. So there's a working mind course that is excellent for reducing mental health stigma in the workplace. There's a manager version and like a non-manager version. There's also mental health first aid, which is another course to help assist a person who's experiencing mental health crisis. But other than like, just in terms of how do we build things so that, like, how do we build the culture so that we are as safe of a place as possible? We ourselves model being vulnerable. So one silver lining of the pandemic is that it's normalizing mental health challenges. Almost everyone has experienced some level of discomfort. So this will translate into a decrease in stigma only if people, especially people in power, share their experiences. Being honest about your mental health struggles as a leader and the ways you support yourself opens the door for your team. And wow, do I know that this creates a lot of like resistance and like, no. I don't think so. And I would say perhaps look into the work of Brene Brown, especially in terms of how to support workplaces. And there's a lot of data to back this up, and a lot of kind of training on how to do this in a way that is that feels professional and human at the same time. Being able to model healthy behavior. So let's just say you're like, yeah, this has been really challenging. I am a parent. I have been feeling like a blender with the top off for the past couple of years. It's just that, like, that's just human. And then being able to say, so I actually know that I need to be able to prioritize a therapy appointment, or I'm going to be turning off email to take a little staycation because I need that. I'm going to take a walk now, to like, just modeling those little things it's not having to say, like, it's not having to have a big TED talk and reveal a bunch of stuff to your team. It's just modeling your humanness allows permission for others to do the same. We build a culture of connection through check-in. So intentionally checking in with your direct reports on a regular basis, especially if they work from home. I just want to say check-ins can be work related, but also sometimes they're just like, how you doing? Cool. Everything, like, how's it going with such and such, like in your life, like it's personal and professional. It's like, what actually, if you think about who have you felt the safest with in your life in a professional environment, chances are you also felt that they cared and respected you as a human. So how do we build human connection? So that's just what I'm thinking of. In a recent study, nearly 40% of global employees said that no one at their company had asked them if they were doing okay. 40%, it's almost half. And those respondents were 38% more likely than others to say their mental health had declined since the outbreak. That's in relation to COVID. explicitly say it's okay to tell me if you're spread too thin. Wow, if I could have a magic wand and just put that line into the vocabulary of a lot of people out there, because I work with people who just they can't say that for themselves. They could never. And sometimes we need that permission, because it doesn't mean that everyone is all of a sudden going to be like, I'm spread too thin. Like that, people have a really hard time saying that, but it can help even to hear it. It can help them manage better. And just, it's like we're afraid to say it because we think then everyone's going to take us up on it and there won't be enough people to do the work. But that just doesn't have enough. I don't buy into that view of humanity. It's just not what I see. Be able to proactively offer flexibility, like especially with childcare. I don't know if anyone else has kids, young kids. I have 2 young daughters, and wow, the sicknesses, all of the things. Like if I'm self-employed, but I have friends in the same situation, and they are in a position to offer flexibility to others and do so because they're so aware of how much they themselves need it. And so whether or not you need that, if you're a mom with young kids or a dad with young kids and has to be home and trying to manage all of that, sometimes we don't always have the empathy for people if we're not in the same boat, but being able to recognize what people need, proactively offer it, and then if you can share your use or need for the same, that goes even further. Communicate more than you think you need to, as we've been talking about, and remove stress where possible by setting expectations about workloads, prioritizing what must get done versus what can wait if necessary. A lot of what I do with people, no matter if what's going on with them, it's, can we get clear in your mind of everything you need to do? And if you're not the one solely responsible for that, if there's someone you report to, can we talk about it with them to be like, am I right? Like, is this, can we be together, look kind of at my priority list, and this is what I'm prioritizing this week? Does everyone feel good about that? Because sometimes people just go to extreme lengths to find a way to do everything they think is expected of them at such a serious personal cost, which later turns into a company cost. Offer trainings and resources to build time management and organization competencies, because all of these skills allow people to feel more in control and more peaceful in themselves, and develop more self-compassion, and also just become more efficient because they have more clarity. And wellness promotion workshops. Proactively share mental health resources and normalize the use of them regularly. Run informal pulse surveys to check on the emotional temperature of your team, just a good best practice. And celebrate micro successes freely and generously. Support relationship building activities between team members. Now, I know I'm saying a bunch of stuff. I again want to reiterate what I said at the beginning. This is not about perfection. If there's HSPs in here, or anybody, people with ADHD, anyone who's going to be hard on themselves and be like, yeah, see, I'm overwhelmed. There's too much to do. This is way too many things. Think of it like we are at the beach and we are looking for seashells, and there's a bunch of the seashells that I've laid out, and you take home the ones that you want. You don't have to take it all at this moment. We just start with a little bit. Any little effort matters, and just even expanding our awareness and thinking about it differently can help. And over time, this is like a beautiful menu from which to choose what works. And obviously employer benefits, the more that they can cover counseling therapists, not just psychologists, by the way, but therapists. There's different. It's not a perk anymore. It's really a necessity to have comprehensive mental health supports. So here's some book recommendations. With ADHD, I would say Scattered Minds is my all-time favorite book by Gabor Mate. Thriving with Adult ADHD and Driven to Distraction are some classics. For HSPs, The Highly Sensitive Person. This is if you want to learn more about it for yourself, for your team. I foundationally have been thinking a lot about how I think when it comes to making workplaces safe, the more that we see ourselves in any of this stuff, which is why I want to talk about neurodivergence more broadly, because it's a wider pool. It's if we see it as I have to do this stuff for them. I have to do this stuff for those people with ADHD, for those people who struggle with mental health, as opposed to saying, I'm in that too. If we're really distanced from our own kind of fragility, or the fact that like all humans walk a line of being able to experience challenges at any time. Like we're not like identity wise, just like that would never be me. And if that is how you feel, you might have a compassion block to this, because that you would have a self-compassion block. So just the more we can learn about this and start to expand our own self-compassion and our own awareness of like, maybe that could possibly be me. It's almost more natural. And it's just like how we're going, it's going to make a lot of sense to put a lot of this stuff in place. Quiet is a fantastic book about being introverted in a world that can't stop talking. So it's about how the world has a bias to extroversion. And I think if you're an extrovert, this is a really powerful book to read too, especially if you're in a leadership position, and the Empath Survival Guide. And then for depression, anxiety, I just think all leaders should read these books. Burnout by Amelia and Emily Nagoski. Why has nobody told me this before is just a great overview of mental health and just like intro psych kind of like understanding our mental health. Brene Brown, Dare to Lead, specifically for employers, The Gifts of Imperfection on a personal level, How to Do the Work, What Happened to You on Trauma. Like these are just some great books for your own self-deepening. Okay, so thank you so much. I am so happy to share this information. I hope that you had some helpful takeaways today. And thanks for having me.
Thank you so much, Kaylee, for the great presentation. I think we can all relate to the topics that were covered today, whether it be ourselves experiencing a challenge in our mental health or someone you know or you work with. So I think it was really helpful to know how to identify as well as support those individuals, especially in the workplace. So I hope everyone took away some great information to bring back to your SMEs to help Canadian workplaces be better prepared to manage mental health in the workplace. So again, thank you, Kailea, for your time today. It's always such a pleasure to have you give these sessions. And if anyone has any questions, please feel free to send us an email at info@hirefortalent.ca. And thanks again.
Thank you. Bye.